Good evening and welcome to Space Center Houston. We're thrilled to have you here this evening. I want to reiterate with a safety announcement that please note that our exits are to the left and right of the screens. And if there is some type of emergency, please exit through those doorways and they'll take you to the exterior of the building. Space Center Houston is a nonprofit and immersive space exploration destination center with the purpose of bringing people and space closer together. We serve as the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center and share the story of human space exploration, past, present, and future, with more than 1.3 million visitors from around the world every year. Thank you for joining us for Space Center Houston's Thought Leader Series, Polar Operations, Exploring Healthcare in Extreme Environments, presented by the University of Texas Medical Branch. Our Thought Leader Series program brings space and science experts from around the country to provide insights and perspectives on space exploration. With NASA Johnson Space Center, allied government agencies, commercial and academic partners, our Thought Leader panelists are subject matter experts who discuss their research, findings, and insights in exploration and future space missions. At Space Center Houston, we believe science learning and space exploration are for everyone. To plan your journey, if you're going to come back to Space Center Houston another day, please go to our website at spacecenter.org to secure your time ticket. We're really busy this time of year, and often we sell out. So I encourage you to do so and come see all of our new installations. Now I'm delighted to introduce the President and CEO of University of Texas Medical Branch, Dr. Joaquin Reiser, who is an amazing humanitarian, scientist, and educator. I had the pleasure of touring with him with his children a few months ago, and they are incredibly inquisitive, along with Dr. Joaquin, and I'm so thrilled that he is here this evening to share a few words about UTMB. Dr. Reiser.
Thank you so much. Well, good evening, and thank you, Mr. Harris. It's really delightful to be here in this beautiful theater and to share with you some really special moments about expeditions of medicine and science into dimension where we would probably not necessarily think about. All of you know, and I know, how humbling it is when we are in need, when all of a sudden a chest hurts or an arm breaks or something doesn't function, we get scared. And we need to, we feel at the element of who we really are. And it's so important to then be at an institution where we feel be taken care of. So when I came to UTMB, our missions were clearly to me so broad. I was so proud to be in Texas and at an institution where we care about everybody. We care about people who are jailed. We care about people in suits. We care about people out in space, out on the ocean, out on the mountains with our aerospace medicine program. It's just very cool to be having such a program. And I think UTMB in particular, and through this collaboration with the Johnson Space Center and NASA, we really have the dominant and the most prominent program in aerospace medicine. And for me, not just because of my 3 kids, but also as a scientist, what can be more exciting to learn about our experiences in extreme conditions and what it means to take care of people when there are very few hands on deck or very few equipments and one is not always well prepared. Very different than standing in an operating room where you literally have everything available and at your disposal. So we value this collaboration with the Johnson Space Center, NASA, very, very much. It's essential to our mission, and it's something at UTMB we will continue to explore, expand, and actually double down on. So I'm really excited to be here tonight. I will tell my children that I will be here tonight, and then the questions will arise. Irving is in here. He's someone who guided us through the Space Center the last time, and since then we have been going back and forth together and also see how we can expand on this collaboration. But tonight is also about Dr. Shah, who sits here with us in the audience. We are very, very fortunate that this particular part of UTMB's mission is represented by literally one of the finest that there is in the United States to run aerospace medicine. Not only is he a graduate from our own program, but he has been the chief medical officer at Johnson Space Center for several years, I believe 5 years, has been involved in pushing forward the society that takes care of innovations and many scientific questions that are related to aerospace medicine. Because, believe it or not, these things are not evident to everybody. Sometimes one has to argue, why do we need to study, let's say, how bones react or how we get people down from a mountain under extreme conditions down to safe areas? It's not evident to everybody. He is an exquisite representative of that task. It makes it happen that our programs are continuing to thrive. So Dr. Shah is somebody who is very vocal and very outspoken about the program. He comes to me on a routine basis. I have more memorabilia in my office from space and high seas than any other CEO or president could ever dream of, and I'm really grateful for that, and it certainly got me more and more interested in the topic. So Dr. Shah leads our aerospace medicine program. We are collaborating not just with NASA, but also with other entities, and have really missions all over the world, in the polar arc, out on the high sea, on the mountains, in Russia, in space, everywhere. And so hopefully you'll be even more convinced at the end of this evening how important it is that he's doing and his team, and I can't be more grateful for having you lead our program. So thank you for that, and with that, I'm going to give you the mic. Dr. Shah. Thank you.
Well, good evening, and Dr. Reiser, thank you very much for that wonderful, polite introduction. It is a pleasure to be here tonight at Space Center Houston. I thank you all for joining us this evening, and William, it's always a pleasure to be here with you. So I am director of the UTMB Aerospace Medicine team, and I'm delighted to be here at the Thought Leader Series at Space Center Houston. It is an honor for me to introduce two of my esteemed colleagues who will be entertaining you this evening with some of their experiences and lessons learned in education. To start, we have Dr. James McKeith, and he is the Medical Director for the United States Antarctic Program, as well as Chief Medical Officer for UTMB's Center of Polar Medical Operations. Under his guidance, UTMB supports the National Science Foundation's operations in Antarctica at McMurdo Station, the South Pole Station, Palmer Station, as well as the Foundation's deep field camps and 2 of their research vessels. Dr. McKeith earned his medical degree from Jefferson Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia and completed a residency in emergency medicine at Los Angeles County USC Medical Center. Joining Dr. McKeith is another esteemed colleague, Dr. Craig Kutz, who is a resident in aerospace medicine, or RAM as we call them, at UTMB. Dr. Kutz is double board certified in emergency medicine and undersea hyperbaric medicine, having completed his residency and fellowship at UC San Diego. He completed his diploma in mountain medicine in 2021 with the International Mountain Medicine Center at the University of New Mexico. He is a fellow of the Academy of Wilderness Medicine since 2020. Dr. Kutz also happens to be alum for the UTMB Center for Polar Medical Operations at McMurdo Station. He is a former advanced wilderness life support instructor. He participated most recently for 3 months in Nepal as a physician for the Himalayan Rescue Association, but he was no stranger to that. For in 2019, he also participated in the Wilderness Medical Society's Everest Base Camp Trek. So with that, thank you, Space Center Houston. Thank you, William. And to my colleagues, thank you for being here. I hope you all enjoy the show.
Very good. Now we're going to actually hear from our 2 panelists to provide us with some further background about themselves and their experiences.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today to speak on this topic on behalf of both UTMB and a program that I'm very proud of, which is the United States Antarctic Program. I've been affiliated with the program since 2012 and have been in this position since late 2014. So they kind of gave us, this is a 90-minute talk, that I'm going to put in 15 minutes. I apologize. I'm going to talk quickly. I'm going to try to cover the subject superficially. And if there's something that interests you, I do hope that you'll send us some questions and we'll be able to address things more in depth at that time. So this is South Pole. That's the ceremonial pole there, and a Scott tent. A Scott tent is designed to survive the rigors of the weather at Antarctica. The winds hit 150, 200 miles an hour at times. It's minus 100 degrees outside, and people go out and sleep in those tents in the middle of the winter. I don't get it. That's up to them. So let me tell you about Antarctica. So Antarctica is the coldest, driest, windiest, and emptiest continent in the world. It is the world's largest desert. Nobody ever thinks of that. It's the most remote location, and it is about 1.5 times the size of the United States. And we put all of the programs combined, have around 4,000 people on that entire continent during the winter, during the summer. During the winter, it drops to several hundred. So it is pretty empty over there. We have people in our program that range from ages 18 to 74. It is male predominant still, but those numbers are rapidly shifting. So a little over a decade ago, there would have been 1 or 2% women. And the most important thing is we are a city there to support science. And as a consequence of that, we sort of have an equivalent of every job that exists in a small town in the US. So, I listed some of the occupations there, but, trust me, we have some equivalent. And sometimes if we don't have enough people like full-time firefighters or rescue people, we train lay people to help rescue each other in those situations. And they really become part of, we have a trauma team and a rapid response team and a firefighting team. And we all count on each other to survive and do well down there. This is the mission of the National Science Foundation. So why are we in Antarctica? So, the Antarctic is protected by a treaty that was signed in 1949 by, it's now up to 49 signatory nations. And it is a continent that is dedicated to science. It's apolitical most of the time. And there's not a military presence there. And we spend a lot of time and effort, and it's a very collegial relationship that we enjoy down there. They're there to protect the Antarctic environment, to understand the region and its ecosystems and the impact that it has on the rest of the world. We foster cooperative research with other nations. It is a relatively unique environment to study not only the upper atmosphere. The ozone hole was found, by people working in Antarctica, and also space, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And these are just a couple of the areas that we study while we're down there. There's a lot of research happening. It's your tax dollars that are paying for it. I should say thank you. I just wanted to start off with just a couple examples of the missions we do. So this ties in nicely to Space Center Houston. This is a NASA project, Gusto. It is there to study the matter between the stars. So, almost empty space, and it's looking for that, I am an emergency medicine physician. It ties into dark matter and dark energy somehow. There you go, that's all I know. And this is how we get it. So we take that thing, and you saw it. Let me go back real quick, I should have pointed out. Those are people down there. This is a huge structure. And we put it on this balloon that's about 10 stories high. And this most recent mission just set a new record. It's floating above the Antarctic continent for 57 days, 7 hours, 38 minutes. You can read it as well as I am. But this is a time lapse of what this thing is doing. So it'll go up, and it'll go up to 100,000 feet. And it'll do a circumpolar with the winds around there, and it'll just circle around the pole. And they will use that platform to try to see deep into space and get stuff that can only be found where the atmosphere it's thinner, it's cleaner, and there's less light pollution. This is another project too. So we do a lot of climate science, and we go out into these deep field camps like WACE and WIZARD. We use a lot of acronyms down there. And we dig these ice cores. And so this ice core, goes back, that little dark spot at the bottom was a volcanic eruption 75,000 years ago that resulted in almost, a near extinction event. I mean, they proposed that the human population dropped to 10,000 people, right? And so studying what the atmosphere is, studying what that environment was like during those changes informs us about the future we hope doesn't happen, but still the future, potential future. And then we study the food circles, we study marine mammals, and a lot of there, and we have cute seals. We have penguins too, keep that in mind. This is just a picture of the South Pole telescope, but I was asked to talk briefly about how I got there. How does someone get this job? So I am an emergency medicine physician. I got a master's in healthcare. I have some aviation experience, some hyperbaric and scuba experience, was an aviation medical examiner. So it kind of gives you that broad, diverse background that emergency medicine has, sort of sets you up to be able to be in the situation where you need to know the next thing, and then you can seek help from other experts like UTMB's experts when we need more information and experience. How did UTMB get there? So UTMB has been, at the forefront of telemedical care long before they've been affiliated with the NSF, but they've been the sole consultant to NSF for remote medical information since 2001. And they were invited to bid to become the sole medical provider in 2012, and that's actually the first year that I deployed to McMurdo Station for about 7 months. We hire the medical providers, we manage the logistics, we give advice on medical topics, including COVID. We help coordinate evacuations when they're necessary, and we do support NASA's research. So Antarctica has been used over the last decades as an analog for long duration spaceflight. We put people into these very isolated environments, and we pretty much cut them off from contact to the outside world. That has gotten better since Starlink, but still, it's a pretty unique environment, and we have these small teams working together, and NASA studies how they get along, what happens, how do you cope with issues that arise. And then we also do provide austere environment experience to both NASA physicians who come down and visit us and our aerospace medicine residents, of which Dr. Cutts is a sterling example. This is just real briefly to cover it. So the NSF-U own the stations down there. And they contract, they own the United States Antarctic Program, and they contract with the logistics contractor that's called the Antarctic Support Contract. ASC contracts with UTMB to provide the medical support, and Center for Polar Medical Operations is technically who I work for at UTMB. This is to remind me that I have some patches to hand out, but I think we have more people than I have patches. We'll try to figure that out later, sorry. This is kind of where Antarctica is in the world. So to get to Palmer Station, up on the Antarctic Peninsula, we have to go through South America. We cross the Drake Passage, some of the roughest seas in the world. I literally just got back beginning of April on that passage, and it was smooth as could be. Everybody says it's really bad out there, but I've never experienced it. And then, we have McMurdo, which is really, everything is south. I know that, but it's south of New Zealand, and we fly through Christchurch, New Zealand to get there. And then we go through McMurdo, which is the largest station in Antarctica, and it is also the gateway to South Pole Station. And yes, these arrows don't point exactly to where the stations are. I've been giving this talk for 12 years, and I just looked at it the other day and said, hey, that's not where it is. So just, McMurdo Station's right there. Palmer Station's right there. I do know. Okay. So what do we do down there? So part of what UTMB's goal is to make sure people get down there, they're safe to be there, and that we keep them safe while we're down there. So we physically qualify everyone that deploys with the U.S. program. We do non-invasive testing. These aren't astronauts. We can't put them through some of the things like a cardiac cath, or take their appendix out. There are other programs that have done that in the past. So, we get EKGs, we get blood work, we do physical exams, and we ask questions. We ask a pretty thorough medical history. We're always mindful of the procedure risks that they undergo, so we have to do stress tests for older people that are going to South Pole for the winter. By the way, I count myself as an older person going to South Pole for the winter. So, and sometimes there's risk with medical testing, so we take that into account. We do have to deal with difficulties in scheduling sometimes. How much testing can we get done? And during COVID, it was incredibly difficult. And the information we derive has got to be meaningful. It's got to tell us whether it's safe or not safe to send somebody down there. And UTMB on the Antarctic side, we're physically qualifying roughly 2,500 people a year, just to give you a perspective. And this is how I approach my job. What can we do to avoid needing to use superior skills, knowledge, and resources to manage medical emergencies? Because we don't want them, okay? It costs the program roughly $85,000 an hour to run a C-17 and $65,000 for an LC-130. And those are our two primary medical evacuation aircraft that we have to go. Weather delays us. I was delayed 2 weeks getting in during what was supposed to be the good weather, when I first went in 2012. We had a team delayed a month this year trying to get in. The weather is, as you could imagine, very unpredictable. And they can be dangerous. We did have to do a midwinter medevac from South Pole in 2016. And when the aircraft was coming out, it actually lost one of its engine, and it was so overloaded with fuel and people that it couldn't maintain altitude. They thought they were going to die. We didn't know that at the time, and they were awarded the Smithsonian Trophy for safety in flight, and they deserve it. So we don't want to be put in the situation where we have to do something like that. So our general approach is, do we understand their health? Between the testing and the questions, do we know what diseases they have? And then can we manage those? They've got to be well managed at the time they're counting on going down. And then we look at it and say, well, okay, what's the expected complication? And I always use diabetes because it's a disease that people are familiar with. But if you're a diabetic and you get really sick, you get something we call DKA. We can manage that. There are other diseases that we either don't have the testing capability, the people, or the resources to manage that. And so we don't want those conditions down there. And obviously winter is higher risk, so we do have more testing there. And then we have this logistical challenge that we also manage. By the time you leave here, and we ship stuff out today from Texas to LA, to New Zealand, to McMurdo, to South Pole, it ends up being 14,000 miles. And we have medications, and there's delays, and medications can expire. And so we're ordering stuff way ahead of time and trying to anticipate when it will get there to make sure that it's not expired before it gets there. We also hire new staff. So I hire physicians from all over the United States, and they come they're generally family practice or emergency medicine with enough experience that they can go down there and really be independent, right? There's not a lot of immediate reach back in some of these situations. And then we support them, but we also ask them to do things. I walk into ERs anywhere in this nation, and I expect to have sutures and, central line kits and intubation equipment and, defibrillators. I mean, you just know that's going to be there, right? Well, we send these guys down there and say, hey, while you're there, inventory the pharmacy, count how many needles you have, and make sure that if they're expiring that you tell me so I can order new ones. So it's an interesting challenge. NASA shares some of the same, risks and concerns. And then we do have to deal with infectious disease management. So we kept COVID out for 2 years, and when it finally came in, it was when everybody was vaccinated, and we decided we had to let it in and couldn't interfere with science. We faced measles outbreaks, flu every year. We have people that come from Africa directly to Antarctica, and so we have to screen for Ebola sometimes. And we've actually had people come directly from Africa and bring malaria with them. So that's interesting. So when you get down there finally, so that's kind of the background of what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And then we talk about the good part, the pictures, how we get there. So you're going to be in Christchurch, New Zealand during their summer, because their seasons are opposite ours. So we're going into summer. They're going into deep winter right now. So it's hot as heck out there. You're walking across a scorching tarmac, and you're wearing all your extreme cold weather gear, because if the plane goes down, you've got to be dressed, right? So it can be a little miserable. And then you're crammed into these little LC-130s, and your knees are in between the knees of the person sitting across from you, and you're sitting on these webbed seats, and it's a long 8-hour flight, and you're kind of going, what was I thinking? But this is what you start seeing pretty soon. So these peaks are 10 to 14,000 feet high, and those white fluffy valleys, that's snow that's, a mile, it's snow and ice, mile, 2 miles deep, right? So you're seeing just the very tips of those peaks. And you land on skis on one of the aircraft, and you get to see a penguin. So this isn't a deli, just, we'll point out the differences. And when we go into the clinics, and this is kind of our capability. So we have no advanced imaging. We teach our doctors how to take x-rays, right? And we have actually excellent instructions. They do this, then do that, then do that, and it works fairly well. We have ultrasound machines, actually really good ones, but you have to be the ultrasound tech. We run point-of-care testing systems, so we have a Piccolo and an iStat. We do have ACLS as advanced cardiac lab support. So we have critical care capability, but we've got 1 or 2 people to manage a critically ill patient. When someone comes into the ER coding, I got 20 people there to help me. We can do everything at once, and now it's one person doing all those things separately. And we got slit lamps, and we got a couple beds there. We do have a fairly robust pharmacy, actually. We have a telemedicine suite, so we stabilize patients and we reach back to advice for UTMB all the time, and it works really well. We use a walking blood bank, I won't visit that, and we do not have an operating room, and that's been an issue occasionally. This is McMurdo, that nicer looking picture, that was South Pole. South Pole was finished in 2008. This building was built in 1957, and it shows every minute of its age. But it's our home. I think Craig's actually got a much better picture of it than I do, but this is what we usually see in the Antarctic. So we've got upper respiratory. The McMurdo crud is some combination of virus and environmental. The atmosphere is very dry, and it's very cold, and people don't really do very well breathing in very cold, very dry air for very long periods of time. And then we have slips, trips, and falls, because, hey, surprise, it's snowy. We have GI every once in a while. We have a single galley that serves everyone. So actually, sanitation and food safety is a huge concern of ours. So we really don't get much in the way of GI illness. Every once in a while, we'll see a norovirus case that comes in. We lock it down right away, and it is never spread beyond that. Maybe it doesn't like the cold either. We do have sleep disturbances because 24 hours of daylight is hard to get used to. And sometimes we have psychosocial challenges. So this is a little bit about McMurdo. So we have a dock and a mid-level there during the winter right now. And then we have a more robust team because now we're going from 250 people right now to 1,000 people during the summer. And this is where we're going to manage all our medevacs and go through. Today's weather, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 28 centigrade. Just for your information, minus 40 Fahrenheit and centigrade are the same. I've seen that a couple of times. So our winter population is 150 to 250, our summer is 1,000. It looks much prettier at night with snow or on the ground. Most of the time it's a mining town. And then we're in the deep fields. So this is about 1,000 miles away. This is the West Antarctic ice sheet, one of the drilling platforms, and it's also the gateway to the Thwaites Glacier, which you may have read about in the newspaper, called the Doomsday Glacier. And so we do work there. I have to go faster. And then we have Palmer Station, which we have 20 people during the winter and 40 roughly during the summer. We have only one doctor there year-round. It was 29 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pretty warm there actually right now. And this is where I just returned. And they have whales. They've got great life, sea life down there, lots of whales, lots of birds. People go from all over the world and pay a lot of money to take birding tours of the Antarctic, and they're just, it's amazing. And we have penguins. Okay. And then we have 2 ships at sea. So this is the Palmer, this is the bigger one. And then we have a small one, the Lawrence Gould, that's actually going off contract with us. We have roughly 40 to 50 people on those ships, and we only have an EMT. And this just gives you a comparison of the size difference. So these are our primary research vessels. The one on the left was our Jeep. It's the Antarctic Supply and Research Vessel. It carries people and supplies back and forth. And the other one is our Deep Ocean Research Vessel. And this one just returned. I put a PA on it for part of the time because they were going to be gone so long. And he said it's the roughest seas they've ever encountered, and they were all sick and they were all miserable. But that's why we have someone there to try to take care of them. And then we have South Pole, and I'm going to talk more about all the challenges using South Pole as the model. So We have a physician in mid-level year-round, 150 people during the summer, 50 during the winter. The winter there is 9 months long. It closes February 15th, and it doesn't open until November 1st, and that's just it. Today's weather was minus 75 with the winds. It felt like minus 104. And the winds were only 10 miles per hour. But the air quality is excellent, and we have a clean air research facility there. It is built in 2008. It is a space station, essentially, and it is designed to be cut in half. If something happens on one half, we have redundancy of power, water, sewage, and food to get us limping through the other half of the season. It's at 11,000 feet, and so people experience altitude illness. In the beginning, everybody sort of experiences kind of a low oxygen, a little bit loss of energy, periodic breathing. You wake up gasping in the middle of the night because of insomnia. There is delayed healing. It's cold. Frostbite and hypothermia are risks, but we actually do a really good job of teaching people how to avoid that. It's when they ignore us that we get into problems. And it's, someone will say, oh yeah, my feet were hurting, but then they got better. Well, they got better because they got numb, and they got numb because they weren't doing very well. But, so you have to teach those kinds of things. During the winter, they're inside for 9, 10 months. The satellites are only up for 12 hours a day. You're meeting the same people every day. You're eating in the same food. There's no fresh fruits or vegetables. It's dark 24 hours a day. And for us, there's low acuity, low medical acuity. Okay, that's great, except you're there for 10 months. And now you're sitting there, do I still remember how to start an IV? So we talked about that. And showers, water, we melt the ice, and we use that to create water. But it's a high energy consumption to make water. And then, there's a lot of fuel and other things logistically that go into that. And so you're restricted to 2 2-minute showers a week. I tried to make the argument, well, medical people have to be clean, right? That didn't fly. Sort of see the same medical issues, but there's always the unpredictable. So we've had new diabetics, breast cancer, heart attacks, multiple sclerosis, appendicitis. Dr. Cutts was down last session, so Craig's going to tell us about his experience. Our mission statement is to be able to provide critical care for 2 to 3 patients for 2 to 3 days. This is the equipment we work with. I apologize for flipping through these. These are some of the science we do. The left is the South Pole telescope, and the right is a neutrino detector. And then we talk about really the risks of medevacs. So the reason we PQ is to avoid medevacs, but we had a tractor, one brother ran a tractor into the other brother and broke his femur. Stuff just happens. You're in a dangerous environment, you're tired, it's monotonous, you lose concentration, you lose the ball. And so things happen, and sometimes we have to get people out, and we've got to deal with the complex logistics and risks and costs of those. And let me just say that I'm always mindful of cost, but the NSF is not. If I say they need to get someone out, they get them out, and they don't even blink or think twice about the money. So, but that South Pole medevac, from the day we pulled the trigger, it was 25 days until the plane got there and could get the patient out. And that was with every day, twice a day we had meetings with 5 different countries and 30 different agencies all supporting, getting that out. But there's ferry permits. You got to fly the aircraft on skis from Canada because we can't use aircraft ski equipped with hydraulics. There's all these complications, and it's never been faster than the last one we just did. If you can't evacuate, this is an option. This is a Russian surgeon from 1963 who had to take out his own appendix. He had a plumber holding him a mirror, and he did survive. And this is published multiple places. And that is it. I apologize. I hope I didn't go over, and I apologize for talking quickly. The rest of this is just little cute pictures to go through so you can see what the fun part about Antarctica. Thank you.
That was absolutely fascinating. There was so many questions. I can't wait for our discussion. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Craig Kutz.
All right. So thank you. So it's really an honor to be here. Really kind of surreal, to be honest, be asked on a panel with Dr. Shaw, Dr. McKeith, and really just from Space Center Houston. So really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. I'm actually hoping to share a little bit more of kind of the boots on the ground experience. So we got a really good background of what the experience is like down in polar. And in my experience, I've actually had the fortune in my career thus far to work in a couple of different extreme environments. So I've had a chance to work up at altitude. I've had a chance to work down south at the McMurdo station. So I'm really hoping to kind of dive into a couple different aspects of it. And this is my cute picture of a SEAL that I wanted to put up there, because we had to put one of these up there. But really, it just kind of gave me an opportunity just to say that it really was fun. Extreme environment medicine is fun. I'm an emergency medicine doctor at my core, but extreme environment medicine is really kind of, it's a unique experience, and I hope to share that with you tonight. So a little bit of background on myself. So I have a background in mountain medicine, mountain rescue. I've been to altitude a couple of times. I've actually been a flight paramedic or EMS or flight physician and done a little bit of high angle rescue. Also had the opportunity, like I said, to be to South Pole, McMurdo Station, but really it's my experience up in Nepal when I was there for 3 months, where I really got a chance to take care of patients that really didn't have much support around me. So I wanted to kind of touch, I will show pictures from Antarctica. I will also kind of show pictures from when I worked in Nepal and a little bit of in between. So these are just a couple of the pictures. The patient in the bottom middle, that's actually one of my patients that had high altitude sickness, but I just wanted to kind of touch on those. So we were both asked to kind of show how we got here. So this was kind of my, if you wanted to say, the traditional path to get there. Undergrad, get your medical doctorate, go in emergency medicine, and then had a wonderful opportunity to be with UTMB Health in aerospace medicine. And really it was the aerospace medicine training that gave me the opportunity to go to the US Antarctic program to work down in Antarctica, and also in the future to get a job with NASA as work as one of their flight surgeons. In addition to that, this is where my path kind of diverged just a little bit, is I was able to do graduate school as well, but really did some training in diving, undersea hyperbaric medicine, wilderness medicine, mountain rescue. And you'll see where some of those actually come into play when you're doing extreme environment medicine. So this is a picture I took of my friend when we were doing a hike down in Antarctica. And I love this photo because it actually highlights one important thing. We show images of the clinic, the cafeteria, all the support system. Dr. McKeith really talked about the support system that we have down there. And we sometimes forget, it is isolated. There is nothing down there. And it really kind of speaks to the resolve that we have as human beings and our desire to explore. And we went from absolutely nothing out there to, this is a picture at McMurdo Station, and this is only a portion of it, but it really kind of highlights that we've come a long way. And I'm very much in the aspect of, I like to take a step back and kind of say, where do we come from? So this, if you're not familiar with this classic photo, this is actually the Scott expedition. So this is actually one of 2 teams classically that were on their, basically walked to the South Pole. If you're not familiar with the Scott expedition, the reason I put this one up there is because unfortunately on the way back, this expedition, everybody in their party died. Why is that important? Fast forward a couple years, and we didn't actually go back to the South Pole for boots on the ground at the South Pole for 40, 50 years. Now this plane itself is not the plane that actually went down there. I actually just like this plane because it's the same one that was in Indiana Jones, and I just wanted to put it up here. But it was actually a DC-3. But 50 years it took us to actually get back to the South Pole. Now why is that important? Because really it was the work of extreme medicine physicians, technology innovations, things like the plane that actually got us to figure out how we can get back to places like the South Pole. And you can see this over and over again in extreme environments. So this is Sir Edmund Hillary and his Sherpa Tenzing on the left. And if you're familiar with them, they are the first people to summit Mount Everest. Now there is some controversy. There's a guy named Mallory that may have actually been up there first. But if you actually look into who was up there first, why did one survive in Sir Edmund Hillary, and Mallory unfortunately passed away on his summit, is changes in oxygen systems. So Hillary actually had some great oxygen systems in comparison to the earlier expeditions. So he was actually the 3rd or 4th expedition that tried to summit that within that decade. And then on the right, you actually have Kami Rita Sherpa. And if you're not familiar with that name, you should be, because he has summited Everest 30 times, 30 times. So why did we start off struggling so much in the beginning in the 1950s to now we have somebody summiting 30 times? Really developing better oxygen systems, better understanding, and this is where extreme environment medicine comes into play, a better understanding of how can we get up to altitude safely? Altitude sickness, how do we prepare for it? How do we prevent some of the illnesses that can occur at altitude? And that kind of leads into how we got here. So this is the Wright brothers on the left, and we have Ed White on the right with his first EVA. So how did we go in the span of less than a century, actually only a couple decades, going from taking the first flight to safely getting to our first EVA outside of our atmosphere? And it's, again, efforts from wonderful physicians such as yourselves, working in extreme environments like polar, working in extreme environments like the Himalayas, and understanding our aviation environment and the understanding how space affects us. But really, it's the advances in technology that allowed us to get to this point. And I love this photo, or comparison of photo, because as you may recognize the Saturn V on the left, you also may recognize our newest baby on the right. So this is our new system to get us to the moon. And I know everybody here at Space Center Houston is very familiar with the International Space Station. So why is this really important? For the last 20 plus years, we've had a continued presence of the United States in the International Space Station. How did we get there? It's knowledge, it's work, it's the research that's being done and how to keep people safe in these isolated environments, in extreme environments. When we push the human physiology to its edge, how can we keep people safe? And this is probably the best photo I have in my entire, there's a lot of pretty photos that I'm going to show in here, but this is probably the best photo that I have. And if you haven't seen this photo, now you have. This is Artemis 1. This is, we're looking back at the moon, we're looking back at Earth, and soon we will revisit the moon and eventually Mars. And it's work from extreme environments and places like Antarctica that enable us to actually get to places like this. And if you actually look at the research itself, medical is extremely important. So if you had no medical capability, after time, over exponentially amount of days, eventually people are going to get sick. It's just a matter of numbers at that point. If you had unlimited medical capability, the most medical you could have, an operating room, anything, eventually somebody is going to get sick. But we can at least make it better, right? So how does Antarctica play into this? So as Dr. McKeith outlined, this is an extremely isolated environment. And I like to say that people don't realize that if somebody would get sick currently on the International Space Station, if somebody in orbit would get sick, we can, and there's variations on this, and this is a very rough number based on orbit, where you would actually re-enter from, is you can get somebody home within 24 hours, roughly, right? It could be faster, it could be a couple hours. Again, give or take a couple different variables. But if you were trying to evacuate somebody from the South Pole, no kidding, that'll take 72, or he even said that could take up to a month sometimes. So the kind of half-running joke down there when people would approach me and, hey, you work with in aerospace. And I'd be like, yeah, do you realize it's actually more difficult to get somebody off of Antarctica than it is for us to take care of somebody and bring them back down from space? Some people don't realize that. Mine are actually in the right location, by the way. Yes, I just wanted to point that out. So extreme environments. So we kind of touched on Antarctica, but I just wanted to say high altitude in the Himalayas. So this is Ahmedabad. So high altitude Himalayas is also extreme environments that we learn from. Dive medicine is very important. Changes in pressure, changes in gas physiology. We also have desert. People don't realize this is actually right here close to home. This is in New Mexico. So that's actually my tent in New Mexico, where we learn about extreme heat. And then, of course, International Space Station, spaceflight, the spaceflight environment, aviation environment. So really, the second half of my talk, I really wanted to kind of touch on some of the aspects that we kind of highlighted in taking care of people in extreme environments. So again, I'm going to really talk about the Himalayas, and I'm going to also talk about experience in Antarctica. So when you think about taking care of somebody in an extreme environment, being an extreme environment physician, there's really 3 phases. And if I really want to be frank about it, the first phase is probably the most important. And Dr. McKeith talked about our qualification process of making sure that people are not sick before you go down. And I'm gonna get back to that concept, but really prevention and preparation is probably the most important aspect of extreme environment medicine. There are different phases, so you have resource utilization when you have the low resources, isolation, of course, and really how to evacuate somebody. Those are all aspects and phases of extreme environments, but really I wanted to touch point on that prevention. But really, because Dr. McKeith covered some of the phase 1, I'm going to really highlight phase 2 and 3. So this is my tent when I was at Everest Base Camp. This is actually the pathway to get up to Everest. So that's the Khumbu Icefall. But really, when people think of extreme environment medicine, this is what they think of. Oh, a tent in the middle of nowhere, you're going to take care of somebody without any resources. Sure, these scenarios you have to be adaptable, you have to trust in your skills. These are cases where we are extreme environment physicians taking care of people. And sometimes it's not necessarily the people you think of. So this is actually a photo I took of one of the Sherpas, or actually porters, heading up to Everest Base Camp, carrying these heavy loads. Without getting too much into the weeds of his story, there was a trauma that happened, and there was a complex case where we actually had to take care of him at altitude, and I had to figure out how we got him back to safety. The one on the right is an interesting photo, and this is actually hot off the press. This is actually my close colleague that actually is up at Everest Base Camp right now. And the reason I put it up here is those lights are actually current climbers going up to Everest. So that is actually going up to Camp 1. If you actually look at the news right now is when they're summiting. But I put it up there because there is a medical facility at base camp and then nothing else. So that is the last medical facility that you get. So you can see those lights are very small, and Everest is actually not in this picture. And it is actually 4 camps to get up to the summit of Everest. If you get sick along the way, it is very difficult to get you down. So that's why I put that up there, because I just wanted to highlight that even in extreme environments, like, it is very hard to get us down. So this is McMurdo. This is my picture of McMurdo, not the South Pole Station. McMurdo General Hospital, as we call it. Looks pretty similar to a normal ER, is that right? So the difference in the medical facilities that we have in McMurdo Station is, you're like, yeah, it looks like I have a monitor, I have IVs, I have medications, I have a pharmacy. What you don't see here, and Dr. McKee touched on it, we do have an x-ray, but I'm gonna do a hypothetical for you. Let's just say there is a medical condition that us as doctors say that you need something like a CT scan, an MRI, or some sort of advanced imaging of your brain or something in order for us to make a diagnosis. And let's just say making the diagnosis versus making a different diagnosis, the treatments are completely different, and one treatment can make the other one worse. In that scenario, we don't have that capability to do that imaging to go one way versus the other. So this is where we're talking about resource limitations. So there's just limitations on what we can do sometimes, and sometimes we have to do our best effort to take care of these patients. I put this next slide up there. Here's my also cute seals and penguins, mainly because for confidentiality, I can't actually talk about individual patients themselves, but this reminds me that I can talk about some scenarios that we had. So really bad fractures. We don't have an orthopedic doctor to fix fractures down there. Sometimes if you have a fracture, there's certain scenarios where you could lose your foot if we don't get you to a doctor soon enough. So we had some of those. We had somebody's heart stop at one point. He did well, but those are scenarios where we're like, we need to get you off the ice and get you back to definitive medical care. And up in Nepal, so similar scenario. So again, I don't have the facilities or the ICU level care or IVs or central lines or intubation equipment or anything like that along the way with me. All I have is a portable ultrasound and maybe some medications. So this is the other extreme of extreme environment medicine. So on the left, you see I'm using an ultrasound to try to diagnose a high altitude illness. And then actually took care of a couple of actually local patients. We did have oxygen up there, but that brings up another topic that I wanted to touch on. We had oxygen. There are oxygen tanks. You're limited in what oxygen you have. So these patients that I had to make the decision in collection with the team and kind of the greater good of what the patient needed, because I want to emphasize we do want to do the best thing for the patient. But the other thing is you have to consider is that if I have 2 oxygen tanks and I use all 2 oxygen tanks on my one patient, maybe the one on the right, I don't have enough oxygen for him. So that I'm basically sacrificing one patient for the other. So it's difficult decisions like that where you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons and make really difficult decisions on, okay, how are we going to resource allocate some of these things for taking care of patients in extreme environments? And I say that because the International Space Station, I know the Space Center here, and I want to bring this back to aerospace medicine, is sometimes we are limited on the resources we have. When we go out to the moon or when we go out to Mars, we're going to be limited on the resources that we have. So some of these decisions that we make, and this is a good example of extreme environment medicine where those are going to correlate very well to some of the decisions we might have to make in deep space exploration. And this is my MacGyver slide. So as an extreme medicine or remote medicine physician, you have to be flexible. You have to be versatile. So I have a tank on the left where I basically used, if you look at the top, there's tape on the side where I had to basically shimmy an oxygen system to it. On the bottom is actually from Antarctica where the dental chair broke and we actually had to use medical equipment. So I used small scissors. I used some actually stuff that you would use for a suture to fix the dental chair. So I was the mechanic in that scenario. On the far right, this is in the Himalayas, is we didn't have an IV pump or an IV pole. So best thing we could do is find the tallest thing and hook up a carabiner to it and use gravity. There was some calculations and everything about how to get the medication in properly, but that's another story to put people to sleep with mathematics. And then the middle one is actually my colleague who was looking at somebody's eye who had probably a cut in their eye, just a small little scrape. But in order to diagnose that as a doctor, you have to be in complete dark. So she improvised and used her down jacket to put over the head and actually was able to look at the eye. So it's improvising or being that MacGyver, kind of a jack of all trades, maybe master of all in these scenarios, while also being the plumber, while also being the mechanic, while also being the PR, those type of things. So, but know your limitations. So this is McMurdo Station. Know that we are limited in our capabilities. We don't have an operating room. We don't have some of those advanced imaging capabilities like a CT scanner and MRI. So that's when you evacuate. So this is our phase 3. So get people off the ice when you need to. And like I said, it can be very difficult. It can be a lot more challenging than you realize at times for weather. So sometimes you are actually taking care of patients that as an emergency doctor, I would have already admitted to the hospital or given to the surgeon. And a lot of times you're like, nope, now this is my patient. I have to kind of get comfortable with taking care of this patient more long term. So you can see the van and actually the ambulance taking this is actually a patient that we did evacuate over to the C-130. And this is, so I actually was on this flight taking care of this patient. So this is a patient that had a respiratory problem, had such an issue with her breathing with oxygen that I actually went with, because when you go to altitude, and this is where aerospace medicine is key, you have to understand that there's certain things that might arise when you go to altitude that her oxygen level might have gotten worse. So I was on board on that flight. So that's our ambulance loading the patient up into the LC-130. And then the one on the right, I just put up there because Dr. McKee touched on, we all on the station work together. So no one in that photo is a medical personnel, but this is a training drill about how to take care of a patient. So I put that on there because I wanted to emphasize that sometimes these evacuations, you're utilizing cooks, you're utilizing janitors, you're utilizing scientists, you're utilizing people that are not familiar with medicine to help with these evacuations. And then the gold standard in the mountain medicine world is helicopters. So there are helicopters down in Antarctica, but to get them off ice, you can't take a helicopter to New Zealand. So this is more reserved for the Himalayas or the extreme medicine, mountain medicine world. And if you're not familiar with the one on the right, so this is actually not my photo. So this one I took from ABC News, is actually a Sherpa that had to put a patient, and that's a patient on his back, and carry him down from, you remember the lights that I showed earlier? Carry him down through all those lights down back to safety so they could helicopter him out. So sometimes you just use what you have. So that Sherpa is incredible because I can't even imagine carrying somebody like that. Teamwork. Teamwork's very important. I know I'm going a little long here, so teamwork is very important. So this is up in Nepal again. Just understand your utilization. Utilize what you have. Communication is key. But ultimately, keep the mission in mind. So I talked about the oxygen systems. I talked about utilizing certain resources. Understand that every decision that you make as an extreme environment physician or an extreme environment or remote medicine doctor, however you want to describe us, every decision that you make has a downstream effect. There is a mission impact, and I want to transition this to aerospace medicine and what we do in aerospace medicine and the training that we get from UTMB Aerospace Medicine is how are the decisions that we make the best for the patient, but also keeping the big mission in mind. So, for instance, in the Himalayas, if you tell a Sherpa that they cannot ascend up to altitude because they are sick, you are now basically telling their entire clientele that they can't go up. So their entire trip is over. In space medicine, if you tell a commander that they are grounded because of XYZ, that influences the mission. In Antarctica, if the doctor on the station would get sick, like at Palmer Station, if the doctor would get sick on station or really seriously injured, and they made the decision to evacuate him out, that he is so sick you have to evacuate them out, now you're down a medical provider on station. So you have to keep the overall mission in mind. So I don't want to give enough time for questions, so I wanted to thank UTMB Aerospace Medicine, United States Polar, the Center for Polar Medical Operations, but most importantly, UTMB Health. They've been intricate in all this. UTMB Aerospace Medicine has been incredible in all this. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to Antarctica if it wasn't for them. In particular, even going to Nepal, they enabled me to have that opportunity and the training that we get in extreme environment medicine. Because I can say I work with some of the leading experts in how to keep people that are exposed to the extremes of the environment and the stresses of space, aviation, polar, wilderness, you name it, they are the experts in keeping people safe and hopefully getting us to that next level of exploration. So thank you very much. I will turn it over for a question and answer session.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating presentation. We are going to put up on the screen a QR code. We have about 15 minutes for some discussion and Q&A. And if you do have a question, you can scan the QR code and you can text it in, and I'll review those. And we'll save a little time for those because I have so many questions myself. I want to start out and actually include Dr. Shaw in this. It's fascinating the stress that the body goes through in these environments, similar to what an astronaut has to prepare for. Do you have to condition yourself to go to McMurdo or to go to Mount Everest? How do you prepare yourself to go into those environments? And then how do you also, how is it similar to training that you do with astronauts to go into extreme environments in space?
So we hire from the general public, right? So we are not selecting, we're not training people. I really wish we could at times, including myself. So that's when we say we understand their health. Now, we do, we encourage people, heart healthy diets, regular exercise programs, weight loss, but we're not in the position, we have to take the people that come to us. And so we make the best of what we have while we're also making the best recommendations we can, to be perfectly honest. We do have some upper weight limits, like you can't have a BMI greater than 40. We do some advanced cardiac screening if you're going to go to altitude at the South Pole.
Does altitude mean 11,000 feet? Or what is altitude?
Yeah, so, for us, you don't start getting acute mountain sickness typically until you're going above 8,000 feet. So, we take people, and when you do what Craig has been doing, you're supposed to advance by, 1,000 feet a day. So we take people from sea level, essentially 0 feet, and take them to 11,000, throw them out of the plane and say, hey, do well. So we do precondition them. We teach them about altitude and illness. We give them Diamox and some other things, but those are the risks. And then we do make them take it easy, because the worst thing you can do is go out and try to be active right away.
So I'm going to be quick on mine just because he covered a couple of the altitude stuff. Fitness is very important in that aspect. But what I will say is sometimes fitness can actually be detrimental too, because sometimes they like to hike up the mountain a little faster. But there is a extensive process sometimes for preparation for getting people to go on some of these expeditions. For instance, we have a pretty extensive medical clearance process. When you're looking at somebody, you take their medical history and actually try to determine, are they going to be safe to go up? And that's really where training in extreme environment medicine, training in hyperbarics, training in aerospace medicine really kind of comes into play for some of those things. And I'm actually going to let Dr. Shaw comment on the space medicine side of it.
So taking a slightly different perspective on this, one of the key questions here is, why do we do this? Why do we take our physician trainees and put them into these types of adverse conditions? And the reason is, certainly there's a difference between what you learn in the classroom and then actually doing it. And we could sit here and enumerate all of the similarities in these extreme environments, but the key is sometimes the best way to learn it and infuse it in your mind is by actually doing it. And then by being deployed to these types of extreme environments, what it actually does is it develops their skill sets, which are then transferable. So when they come back to the spaceflight arena, they have the ability to apply what they have learned, and in turn, help build a better rapport with those patients whom they are serving at NASA.
Fascinating. So a lot of questions came up. People are really stimulated by your presentation. So I'm going to toggle between those and the questions I have. Yes, this is an extreme environment, and actually there was reference made to the testing that NASA does with the HERA experiences, right? We have the human analog in isolation. And of course, those individuals who volunteer or go through extreme vetting before they're actually admitted into that program. And in fact, we have 4 individuals who are coming up in 1 year in Chapea, right, which is the analog for Mars. Do you do any kind of psychological screening for people who are going to McMurdo to understand, are there markers or indicators about how well they will do in this kind of extreme isolation?
So we break that into 2 parts, and in this extraordinarily controversial area, actually. So as part of the physical qualification process, and that does sort of touch on, we don't train people, but we do make sure they're healthy enough to go down there. We also obviously get a psychiatric history, and we look at the meds that they're on and the scenarios and whether they're stable, and we get letters of support from their providers. We used to actually test using, I think what you would describe as generally acceptable psychological screening methods. Those didn't always work out. And so about 5 years ago now, we went to sort of a dual approach mode. So we looked at them, I look at them medically, and I look at their psychiatric history. And then we send people up before the station closes, and it's a 3-prong approach. The first is we have team training before they depart. So we let them go through firefighter training and safety training, et cetera, and we put them into small groups and we challenge them. And they have access to alcohol. And, we watch them at night, we watch them during the day, and we watch how they behave, because those are actually excellent predictors. And then while they're working during the station, we have their supervisors and the station managers. And we have Craig Knott here, who's a past South Pole winter station manager. And they look at the personalities of the people and their ability to work together as a team. And that's probably the most important part is, are you a team player? And we judge them on that. And then we have a final formal review at the end of the season before we close down, and we decide whether or not they can stay. But excluding people because of psychiatric history, there's some real issues with that, and we've been struggling, and we're doing the best approach we can, and it generally works well.
So first, you started the question with talking about HERA. So I know there's actually a couple of alumni from HERA in the room. I actually did a 2-week mission in HERA as well. So, but I guess to bring it back to the HERA aerospace, space medicine, space exploration topic as well, and expand on what Dr. McKee said. As we are starting to work towards exploring a little bit farther out, even longer duration missions, we identify and we understand that isolation, the potential for grief, being separated from your family, certain challenges are going to arise the farther out we get and more isolation that you have, which is why places like Antarctica, polar, are really good analogs that we can kind of explore some of those topics. There's actually an entire division at NASA, the behavioral health and performance, that are actually looking into how are we going to handle situations like that. And Dr. Shaw, do you have anything to add to that?
From the space perspective, when you look at the traditional astronaut selection process, there is a battery of testing that is performed upon some of the finalists with regards to mental health. The testing that is done is kept private. It is not disclosed to the public, but it is something that is done in an exhaustive manner. But I will tell you that it is important to understand the resilience of an individual prior to putting them into these environments. It's also good to know about their interpersonal skills. Are you a good leader? Are you a good follower? Right? Team dynamics play an important role where all of you are equal, on the mission.
No, and that's sort of what we concentrate on. That's sort of our screening process is, hey, are you a team player? Can you get along? And I would say that our program is trying to become more inclusive, and that's why we've changed some of the screening we've done. And in fact, we've liberalized our medical testing. And I will say that, at times we become, I don't want to say, it's not really cavalier, but we just act like, oh yeah, I'm going to get on the plane, I'm going to get down there. But we lost a plane the first year I was there. We lost 3 people on that aircraft. We lost 2 people a couple of years ago. Every station has people that die down there just because of the environment, right? Not from other medical conditions. They may have we have had deaths that are just because they had something that nobody expected, but we do have to remember it's a harsh environment. We have a saying, it's a harsh continent, and it's really true, and we always have to remember that.
Well, I think there's an old adage that, extreme circumstances bring out the best and worst in people. And even when you have people who you have screened and they seem to meet all of the requirements or the qualifications that they should be fine in that environment, are there ways that you are coaching people or improving their abilities to manage the extreme psychosocial stresses of being in these kinds of environments?
From the spaceflight perspective, again, Dr. Kutz had mentioned there's a very robust behavioral health team there. And so that is part of your annual evaluation. You meet with these individuals. Privacy is very much paramount. When you are assigned to a mission and you are assigned a crew to work with, you will go through team building exercises, things that will, for example, in the wilderness, training outdoors, things that can help, like you said, bring out the best and the worst, but the end result is you get to know each other very well, and you start to form a cohesive team. So that is very important. At NASA, there are so many different modalities that can be utilized to achieve that. You can go flying in the T-38s if your crewmate happens to be a pilot. There's so many different things that can be done together to build that. But now when you are talking about a mission, then you also keep in mind what are the things that could support someone from a behavioral health perspective. So there is a psychologist or psychiatrist assigned to that individual for the entire duration of the mission for that individual, plus minus family. So pre-flight, in-flight, post-flight, you have that longitudinal support in place.
And we have we've added a counselor that is there full-time during the summer, and then we have remote counseling during the winter. That's all private. And then additionally, we encourage things like there are AA programs that are run. We purposely keep them away from medical because people are afraid, oh, if medical finds out, I'm going to have to leave the ice. That's not what we try to do, but that's a hard sell sometimes. And then we always have UTMBs reach back to psychiatry, and we have a very robust pharmaceutical formulary that we keep down there for just that scenario.
I'll add one more thing to that is aerospace medicine is a multidisciplinary field. That's one of the things we learned very long ago, that you need to have people with different backgrounds. So the majority of the physicians that come through our training program are trained in internal medicine or emergency medicine or family practice. But as an example, one of the physicians we have coming through training right now is actually a psychiatrist.
I have to make a comment. I love some of the vernacular you use, like on the ice, like when you're on the ice. But I understand it's absolutely fascinating. What are some of the insights and lessons you've learned from working with people in these extreme environments that are now becoming part of general practice? Are there things that you can think of that now the general public is benefiting from in healthcare?
Well, so the first time I treated appendicitis with antibiotics was in 2012. If you had appendicitis, you went to the operating room, okay? And so by being in remote environments, when you can't do things, and this research came out of other places too, but, we've used that routinely, and it has really changed our practice. And in fact, a national program used to take the appendix out of their participants if you were going to spend the year there. And they no longer do that because we can use antibiotics. And there are lots of other examples of things like, telecommunications, remote medicine, et cetera, where we're using the technology that was actually developed in Antarctica and in space, and it's getting day-to-day applications. So now you may stay in your small town and you'll be talking to the expert in Texas. In UTMB, sorry. It's in Texas.
So the thing about extreme environment medicine is to be a really good physician in those scenarios, you still have to be a good physician. And I'm an emergency medicine physician. To be a good emergency medicine physician, you have to work within a team. When you're in the ER, it's not just you taking care of the patients. There's nurses, there's techs, there's radiology techs. It's a team environment. When you're in these extreme environments and spaceflight, NASA, that team dynamic is extremely important. I've seen scenarios where, for instance, somebody trying to summit up to base camp is really struggling, but that team dynamic gets behind them and they make a collective decision and actually work together, and that person actually made it up to base camp. We're very proud of that. It's that same aspect, that team dynamic, and which is why you see a lot of astronauts train as a team. Dr. Shah talked about the T-38, getting that cooperation, that communication, really changing it from an I, me scenario to a we. It really is that team dynamic that gets people to these extremes. And when you look at the history, I talked about history in my talk. It wasn't always just one person. So I talked about Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing getting to the summit of Everest. If you actually read into how they actually got up to the summit of Everest, there was an entire team behind that. Granted, those two were the ones that got up there, and Sir Edmund Hillary even said, I could not have made it if it wasn't for my Sherpa, Tenzing, to get up there. And he even offered Tenzing to take the first steps up there, but if you have met anybody from Nepal, and I know some people in this room have, they're very humble, and he was like, nope, you are going up to the top. But it is a team aspect, and I think it's really important not to lose sight of that.
Absolutely fascinating. So there are a number of questions here about the access to technology when you're there in these extreme environments. I know this is a challenge in space. You can only take so much resource with you. And I know that for space exploration, it's all about the cost per kilogram or the cost per pound. Is it a similar, I was fascinated when you were talking about and showing actually that imagery of people ascending toward Mount Everest. It was actually quite frightening to think you had so many people ascending, and perhaps some of them are not as well equipped as they should be. And so you have finite resources. Talk a little bit, if you could each, and this may be close to our last question, I'm going to go a little over time because this is so fascinating. If you could each speak a little bit about how you manage with limited resources. I mean, you were very entrepreneurial, and Craig, you shared a little bit about that. But as we think about human space exploration and the kind of things that we need to take with us, how do you make decisions around the things that are most critical to have with you in these extreme environments?
So my team will take, and first of all, I'd like to acknowledge, I also work with a team of individuals, and without them, we would not be successful. I do want to acknowledge their contribution, and that's the people on the ice, that's the people here in Galveston and UTMB. So, but my people will say that I'm a pack rat. We never throw anything away down there because you never know when you'll have to do what Craig just did and take this adapter from that and break break something apart and use something else to do it. So our biggest challenge, they have to worry about lifting weight. I just have to worry about how much money it costs, and then also planning it because it takes 3 months to get something down there. So we try to anticipate what we will need for sick people, and then kind of once we have that there, we will make do with everything else. And we've done some really hicky things to try to make it work, but and it does work. So don't ever throw anything away. Don't take that message home.
So you mentioned something, I'll get to your question in a second, but you asked or prefaced it by saying, how do you take that pack up to altitude and decide what to take and everything? For those that have not been in Nepal, and I'm going to talk about the Nepalese people again, the Sherpas and porters, I could not have done it without their help. That is their culture. It is still a team effort to get up there. So I just wanted to highlight them first before I move forward, because I could not have done what I did alone without them. They were incredible. The next thing I want to say is that in any scenario where you're in an extreme environment and you are a limited resource, a phrase I like to talk to people, especially when they're packing their pack or whatnot, is kind of like the Swiss Army knife version. You want something that you can have multiple uses for. One really good scenario that people can, very applicable, is Your water bottle, sometimes you can put hot water in it, and it can work as hydration for you, but it can also work to keep you warm at night. That's one scenario where it's working towards you. From a medical standpoint, if you're evacuating somebody out and they have a neck or head injury, sometimes you can use a sweatshirt or you can use a backpack. So something you can also use in multiple different variations to try to help optimize the weight, the space, whatever you have moving forward. And then to touch on what I mentioned in my talk as well is you always have to be cognizant of what you're using. Don't throw things away. That's one, don't remember that. Just realize that whatever you use, whatever you do, the choices that you make, sometimes you have to think bigger than yourself and realize that your decision or you're using that item or that thing for whatever you want to do. I'm using tape to fix a broken pant leg or something like that.
Or a shoe.
It's going to impact your team. It's going to impact your success as a team. So you have to be cognizant about those things.
I think from a clinical perspective, both of my colleagues here covered it very well, so I'll again put a different perspective on this. In a resource-limited setting, particularly for spaceflight, the question for me is not so much, what are we taking and how much of it are we taking? Its question is, why are we taking it? Right? You need to take a big step back and take a look at who are we flying, where are they going, what are the parameters of the mission, understanding the relative risks of that mission, and then bringing it back to what should we take with us to prepare accordingly and lower the risk overall, right? Keeping the mission success in mind. One of the things NASA has done very well is they have looked into mathematical modeling of medical events, and this is probably another, we have lectures for our physicians in training on this very topic, but it is called the integrated medical model, and it is something that they have been working on for probably over 15 years that takes into account past history, analog environments, synthesizing all of that data and trying to utilize it in a more predictive fashion so that we can then prepare better for future missions. So when we talk about resource-limited settings, again, I think the both of them did a great job talking from a clinical perspective, but then from a risk management perspective, I wanted to add that.
And then if we have time, I'd like to add one more thing as well, is we kind of talked about the decision beforehand to use something. Sometimes you have to have the foresight in the future about if I use something, what's the next step? So we talked a lot about evacuation. We talked a lot about how do we get people off the ice? How do we get people down from the International Space Station? If you make a decision, you have to live with that decision. So a scenario that people ask me a lot is, when you're preparing a medical kit, do you bring something like an advanced airway or like a breathing tube to put in somebody if they become in respiratory distress? And it's a difficult answer to just kind of conceptualize, but in those scenarios, you have to think, if I do this procedure, if I do this medication, if I give this intervention as a clinician, what's the next step? The next step in that scenario would be oxygen. It would be managing that. And those are the difficult decisions you have to make sometimes, because by making that decision, it might strain your entire team, it might strain your entire mission, it might strain how you get that patient down. So you have to think kind of 4, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead sometimes to decide, okay, should I make that decision?
Fascinating. I am so sorry we are beyond time, because I could keep talking with you guys for another hour or two. This is absolutely fascinating, but I want to give you an opportunity to each share, if you have a final thought that you didn't yet share with the audience this evening from your presentation as we've had this conversation. Has something occurred to you that you said, oh, I wish I had said this?
I'm out.
You said everything you need to.
I felt like I talked too long.
I would say, because I know we have a lot of students and stuff that tune into this, and I would say that along my pathway to get to where I am, sometimes it's easy to say, I want to do this because it's cool or it's exciting. Sometimes all it simply is following your interests and really working hard to be good at what you like to do. So some people say, I want to be X, and then they decide that they do 1, 2, 3, 4 to try to get to X, but they hate 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes it's a lot easier and the path is less difficult if you just trust in what you enjoy doing. I enjoy going outside. I enjoy working with my colleagues in emergency medicine. I enjoy going and being freezing, even though my fiance, soon-to-be wife, will say, "Why are you leaving me in the cold?" So just follow your passions. Follow what you enjoy.
All right, then I'll add one. I took this slide out of my presentation, but along Craig's thought, if an opportunity arises, say yes. You have to have a really good reason to say no, and just because it's hard doesn't mean you should say no.
Great.
For me, I just think it's very inspiring. If you're inspired by this, then just get involved. Start it. Because if I look at anything this evening alone, and you look at the past century of what we have accomplished historically, in the spirit of exploration, in the spirit of flight, it is incredible. The trajectory is just off the charts. And so to think about what we will accomplish with today's generation, the youth of today in the next 50 years, I'm just excited about it.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening for an incredibly stimulating presentation and conversation. Please join me in a round of applause for this amazing panel. Again, here at Space Center Houston, we're very thankful to University of Texas Medical Branch for helping make possible this series. It will be cataloged on our website, so if you would like to view it there, it'll be available in just a couple of weeks and will be part of the posterity of our programs, our Thought Leader series. So you can, again, find that at spacecenter.org. We're so thrilled to have all of you here this evening. Thank you for sharing your incredible insights and perspective and experiences. And I know if I go to McMurdo, I'll be in great hands with the medical care provided through UTMB and all that you make possible. So again, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and have a safe drive home.